Okay, so I thought that I would share part of my process of making projects for a lot of new photographers and even for a lot of people that have done a lot of assignment work. They have a hard time starting out, like with how do I even begin a project? Where do I draw inspiration from? How do I go about executing a project? These are a lot of the questions that I get from my students a lot, and so I thought I would share at least part of my process of doing that. Now, my process is unique to me. There's other ways of going about doing this, and maybe we can talk about a few of those ways. But I'm mostly going to focus on how I go about making a project. Okay? So I tend to boil down most projects into, at least in the beginning phases, looking at two kind of like schools of thought, possibly. Some people come into a project and they conceptualize the whole thing beforehand. They kind of plan, they have the images in their head. They construct or execute that project based upon what they have in their head. And then others go about it a slightly different way. When I began as a photographer, I was an assignment photographer. I did what I was told. And that really worked against me trying to find my own way to make my own projects, to find my own voice as a photographer. So I'm not going to spend very much time talking about the first way of like conceptualizing everything beforehand, pre-visualizing and executing. I want to talk about the way that I go about working on projects, okay? And so for me, the way that I tend to go about working on projects is that I just shoot a lot anyway. Like I make pictures all the time without any thought or without any kind of like preconceived notion necessarily. I'll pick up a camera. It could be a lot of different types of cameras from, medium format film cameras, which usually I'm shooting in color. I've been shooting a lot of medium format digital as well, which is also in color. Sometimes I'll shoot 35 millimeter, but typically if I'm shooting 35 millimeter, I probably will shoot black and white. But each of those different formats, even all those different types of cameras, all have different kind of voices, and so I'm not really stuck on one particular type of camera or one particular system or whatever. It's just whatever voice that I want or the things that I feel at the moment, the things that are interesting to me visually. So a lot of my work has been done on medium format color film, but by no means is that, that's just another tool in the toolbox. That's all a camera is a tool. So with the project that I'm working on now, I started experimenting with using flash and black and white and kind of using not just a fill flash, but really overpowering the light in an environment with a flash. That was something that I was just experimenting with. I had no real forethought on like this is a project or anything. It was just fun. I was just playing with that voice, that aesthetic. But in no way does that give me a project just because it has an aesthetic. That's just the thing that I was playing with. And so as I was experimenting with this, we were in lockdown just during the quarantine, and so we were barely going outside. We were stuck at home a lot, and so I was spending a lot of time with my daughter and at home with my family and feeling really cooped up. Everybody was feeling really cooped up. And so one day, my daughter wanted to just run around outside. And so I brought one of my cameras with me and my flash. And we ran around and I just kind of like chased after her and made pictures. Well, in that process of, even making pictures for like 15 or 20 minutes, I made several pictures that I was kind of interested in, that there was something there. There was a thread to pull on. There was something about the way the light sculpted them that I found really intriguing. And so I'm going to show you just the first three pictures, the first that came from the first batch of pictures that I made, really in like a 15-minute span. It was a really small amount of time. This one of this tree, something about how the light shaped and sculpted the tree. The forms and the triangles and all these kind of like lines that were moving around, something kind of activated in my mind, like something's really interesting here, and shooting the light straight up and making this, I don't know, somewhat ominous feeling with the light, and then also photographing my daughter in this way, in this time, and she's feeling very, very free, very liberated. She's running around enjoying herself. But as we're stuck in quarantine, my anxiety was just growing and growing and growing because I knew that as we opened the door and we went back out into the world, for her that meant joy, that meant experiencing the springtime, that meant seeing her friends. But for me, I was just burdened with anxiety thinking about that. What if she's around one of her friends and she catches the virus from one of her friends, and then we catch it and we spread it to someone else or to our family, or we get really sick, someone dies. And so this idea kept swirling around in my head. It was almost paralyzing, but I'm warring within myself. When do we go out? When does she see her friends? Do we never do this? We have to do this at some point. How do we do this in a safe way? And so as we're working and struggling through this, I was standing outside and I smelled just this like aroma of honeysuckle. And so especially in the South where I live, honeysuckle blooms every springtime. And this year in particular, it was just really heavy. And that's such a kind of a something that I think about is that when I was a kid, like whenever spring would come, the honeysuckle would come out and we would run through the woods and we would taste the honeysuckle. And something about the honeysuckle kept coming back and kept coming back. And I took my daughter out into the woods and let her taste honeysuckle for the first time, just for her to have that experience with something so innocent and tender and sweet. So I started reading up on honeysuckle, like, well, why does honeysuckle keep coming back to me? What is it about it that is inspiring to me? And as I did research, I found out that honeysuckle is actually a weed. It's an invasive species that was brought over, I believe, from Japan. And so a lot of people consider honeysuckle to be a weed because it chokes out other plants and other plant life. And I thought, how, fascinating is this? Like, as a child, we think of honeysuckle as this, glorious, beautiful, tasty thing. As an adult, it's actually something that kills things, that dominates things, that its nature is to do that. And that's when the name kind of came to me for the project. And right now the working title is Hide Me in the Honeysuckle Patch. For a kid, like I envy that innocence again. I envy my daughter being able to walk into the woods free and not burdened by the thought of her decision might not only hurt her, but hurt her family, her neighbors, all these things. And living in the time of COVID just intensifies that reality. And so for me, the honeysuckle really, it felt right deep within me. It felt, like the duality of its existence, that it is both a weed and this beautiful little flower that tastes so sweet. It kills things, but it also comes at this time of new life. And I don't really know how that works out. I mean, I'm not a writer, I'm a photographer. I'm more interested in the honeysuckle as a framework, as a symbol, as nature telling me something, teaching me something. And so that's where I draw a lot of the inspiration from my experiences. And this is really how I start a project. I don't plan. I just try to shoot a lot and then I look at my pictures. And I think that's the key thing with starting a project without really any form or without any direct intention. It's my belief that this is a way to activate your subconscious intuition, if you want to call it your gut, whatever you want to call it. This is a way to activate that. And that's by saying yes. That means like, I'm going to go outside and make pictures and I'm just going to chase my daughter around and make pictures, or I'm going to walk down the street, or I'm going to get in my car and drive to the next town over. Whatever catches my eye, I want to say yes to making those pictures. And, this way of doing things means that I make a lot of pictures that never see the light of day. They never go anywhere. I never do anything with them. They don't become a project. There's no intention behind them. But after doing this a lot and after making a lot of pictures, I'll start to see threads connecting. I'll start to see themes or something working together. And so as I was making pictures in this way, I started to see a connection between the feeling that we were having of being so isolated and constrained, and also the freedom that my daughter had just being ignorant of really the gravity of the situation that we were in, that really kind of inspired me to like, how do I really channel that feeling, that anxiety that I'm feeling, but also the liberation that she feels and the desire for her to be around her friends and to spend time with people her age. And so that really calls me to, what is the symbol? What are the things what is the feeling of summer? But how do I image it in a way that really correlates with how I'm feeling? And I didn't put a lot of forethought into it. I just let myself say yes when I'm making pictures, when I'm moving the light around, and looking at how those pictures translate. And then, again, I'll go back and I'll take all the pictures and I'll spread them out and I'll look at them and I'll start to see the connections. What are the themes that are recurring here? What are the things that I tend to photograph over and over? What are the forms that I'm photographing? What do I keep coming back to? And as I do that, I just meditate on those things. What am I thinking about? What am I experiencing in those moments? And where does that take me? What are the themes that are coming through those pictures? And that means that really a lot of the emphasis is put on the edit. Even on the very beginning of making pictures and with some intention, I will, if it starts with 3 pictures, I'll put 3 pictures out, and then I'll go out and make more pictures, and then a few pictures will filter into that, and then maybe a few more and a few more. And we're going to talk about editing later on, but I'm editing and working on a book in the very first couple of weeks of a project. And that helps inform me of like what really subconsciously, what am I really thinking about and working through in my own life that I'm not talking about openly, that's going into my work. And that's where I find a lot of my inspiration from, is really looking backwards at the pictures that I'm making. Maybe it's because I'm not that smart, and maybe that, I'm not smart enough to be a conceptual photographer. But that's the way that I go about doing it. And in doing that, that's how I've made probably my best work, and the work that I'm happiest with is doing it that way. But it's slightly different than I think a lot of people, how they make projects. But in graduate school, one of my professors told me, you have to let the pictures tell you what they're about. Don't impose your own self onto the pictures. Let the pictures talk to you, because the pictures are often smarter than you. And for me, that is always the case. The pictures are always smarter than me, the practitioner. So let's look at where I got some inspiration visually from the past, from photographers that I've seen before, that kind of inspired at least the aesthetic quality of the work that I'm doing now. The biggest one for me is Larry Fink. So we're going to look at some of Larry Fink's work, and specifically a book called Social Graces. And in Social Graces, I remember seeing this in grad school, I think, and the way that he used flash and how it looked so surreal was something that really inspired me. The way that the light sculpted all the pictures, the way that the pictures felt, was just so different than anything I'd seen before. It wasn't realism at all. In a lot of ways, it felt constructed. It felt like being on a studio or being in a studio. It felt there was a fake quality to it almost because of the flash. Like, it didn't seem real, but it also had a snapshot aesthetic. There's these like really interesting moments, really strange, peculiar moments. And this is one of my favorite bodies of work of Larry Fink's. He photographed, these in New York, but also in these more rural areas too. And in some ways, he photographed them all the same way. It was kind of like he approached the subjects in the same way, photographically the same way. And because of the use of the flash, it gave a certain visual unity and equality to everything in there. And that I find really interesting. I think really for me, I'm a color photographer. I see the world in color, but using a flash in this way, off camera, and in a very hard directional way, something about that works really well for me, but only in black and white. In color, it's just too much. But the way to isolate certain parts of the frame with the flash, I find really, really intriguing. And that's really the seed that was planted in my mind years ago as I started to experiment with just the technique. And technique is probably the least interesting thing of a photographic project. It doesn't matter if it's shot digitally or on film, as long as you achieve the image that you're looking for, achieve the image that is interesting to you. And so, you know, the part of making the project really, you know, like I think about the camera that I use as just the voice that I have. Like, what voice do I want to use? But that's such a small part. And then I just use that device, whatever it is, from a phone all the way up to a large format camera. I just use it in the way that it works best. And so for me, you know, using a flash and black and white on all that in this way works best for the place that I am, how I feel at the moment, the way that I want to photograph, the way that I like photographing. And so this is the first kind of like section of where do I get a little inspiration from, you know, where do I draw inspiration from? And in the next video, we're going to talk about just the technical side of it. How do I go about executing the project?